Most people wake up every morning already exhausted, not because life is impossible, but because they are carrying emotional weight that was never theirs to begin with. They spend years trying to impress strangers, chasing validation from people who are equally insecure, building lives that look successful from the outside while feeling completely disconnected on the inside. Society teaches them to care about everything: opinions, status, appearance, followers, money, approval, until their minds become overcrowded with noise. And somewhere between pretending to be happy and trying to become successful enough, they quietly lose themselves. This is the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to admit. Most people are not suffering because life is hard. They are suffering because they are giving too many fucks about things that do not matter. They care too much about being liked, too much about looking perfect, too much about proving themselves. Too much about winning every argument, impressing every person, chasing every opportunity, and maintaining every illusion. And while they are busy performing, life, real peace, slips further away, but eventually, life breaks the performance, maybe through heartbreak, maybe through failure, maybe through loneliness, burnout, debt, rejection, anxiety, or the terrifying realization that achieving everything society promised still leaves you empty inside. And in that moment, a person begins to understand something powerful. Happiness was never about having more. It was about needing less. Less validation, less comparison, less emotional chaos, less attachment to things that were never truly meaningful, because real freedom is not just financial. Real freedom is emotional. It is waking up without needing everyone's approval to feel worthy. It is learning how to sit with discomfort instead of running from it through distraction, spending, entertainment, or fake ambition. It is understanding that pain is unavoidable, but meaningless suffering is optional. It is realizing that confidence is not loud, success is not performance, and peace is far more valuable than status. This journey is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming honest. Honest about your fears. Honest about your habits. Honest about the fact that many people spend their entire lives chasing goals they never consciously chose. They inherit dreams from society, consume endless distractions, and slowly become strangers to themselves. But the moment you stop asking, "How do I impress the world?" and start asking, "What actually matters to me?" your life begins changing. You stop reacting to everything. You stop buying things to heal insecurity. You stop sacrificing long-term freedom for short-term image. You stop abandoning yourself for acceptance, and slowly, clarity replaces chaos. This is the story of emotional resilience, financial wisdom, painful growth, brutal honesty, meaningful struggle, and the subtle art of finally letting go of everything that never deserved ownership over your mind in the first place. There is a strange epidemic spreading through modern life, and nobody talks about it honestly, because honesty has become uncomfortable. Everybody wants to look successful, sound intelligent, appear emotionally balanced, and post photographs that scream, "Look at me. My life is perfect." People wake up every morning not to live their lives, but to perform them. They perform happiness. They perform productivity. They perform confidence. And somewhere between the filtered smiles and motivational slogans, people quietly become exhausted. Not physically exhausted, spiritually exhausted. Emotionally bankrupt, mentally overloaded. They are drowning under the weight of expectations they never consciously chose. They are trying to impress people they don't even like while sacrificing the peace they actually need. And the craziest part is this: most people don't even realize they are doing it. They think stress is normal. They think anxiety is ambition. They think burnout is success. They think constant comparison is motivation. But it's not. It's emotional slavery disguised as self-improvement. Imagine a man standing in the middle of a crowded city street, cars screaming past him, giant digital advertisements flashing promises of happiness. A billboard says wealth will save him. Another says beauty will complete him. Another says status will finally make him matter. Another says hustle harder, grind more, sleep less, buy more, earn more, achieve more, become more. And the man listens. Of course he listens, because since childhood he has been programmed to believe that his worth is something external, something earned, something purchased, something validated by strangers. So he spends years chasing things he was told should make him happy: money, attention, recognition, approval, luxury, followers, influence. But every time he reaches one goal, another appears behind it. Every mountain peak reveals a taller mountain. Every achievement creates another insecurity. And eventually he sits alone one night, staring at the ceiling, asking the question millions secretly ask themselves, why do I still feel empty? That question changes everything, because the answer is brutally simple. Most people are giving too many fucks about things that do not matter. They are emotionally investing themselves in temporary nonsense. They care too much about opinions, too much about appearances, too much about proving themselves, too much about winning arguments, too much about being liked, too much about looking successful instead of becoming meaningful. And every unnecessary emotional investment drains their energy like a leak in the soul. A man once spent 10 years building a business purely to impress people who doubted him. He wanted revenge disguised as success. Every morning he woke up angry. Every deal was personal. Every competitor became an enemy. Every setback became humiliation. And eventually the business succeeded. The money came. The lifestyle arrived. The expensive watch sat on his wrist like a trophy of survival. But something horrifying happened. The people he wanted to impress didn't care nearly as much as he imagined they would. Some envied him. Some ignored him. Some forgot him entirely. And one night he realized he had sacrificed his peace for applause that lasted less than a few seconds. He built a financial empire while emotionally living like a hostage. That is the danger of caring about the wrong things. People think freedom is financial. But the deepest form of freedom is emotional. Financial freedom without emotional freedom creates rich prisoners. You can own penthouses and still be trapped by insecurity. You can drive luxury cars while secretly hating yourself. You can have millions in the bank and still panic every night because your identity depends on maintaining an image. Real freedom begins the moment you stop needing everyone to approve of your existence. That's why the most dangerous people in the world are not the richest people. They are not the strongest people. They are the people who genuinely do not need validation. Because once a person no longer needs applause, manipulation stops working on them. Society loses control over them. Fear loses power over them. Trends lose influence over them. They stop living reactively and begin living intentionally. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding discomfort. But discomfort is where growth lives. Think about the gym. Nobody becomes physically strong by avoiding resistance. Muscles grow through stress, pain, tension, and recovery. The exact same principle applies psychologically. Confidence is not built through comfort. Discipline is not built through comfort. Financial independence is not built through comfort. Meaningful relationships are not built through comfort. Everything valuable in life requires the ability to tolerate temporary pain, but modern culture teaches the opposite. It teaches instant gratification, fast pleasure, constant stimulation, endless distraction. People are terrified of silence because silence forces them to confront themselves. So they scroll, they binge watch, they consume. They chase dopamine all day long while their attention span collapses and their self-respect quietly erodes in the background, and this creates a vicious cycle. The more distracted people become, the less connected they feel to themselves. The less connected they feel to themselves, the more validation they seek externally. The more validation they seek externally, the more anxious they become. And the more anxious they become, the more desperate they are to escape discomfort. So they consume more distractions, more entertainment, more noise, more approval, more shopping, more meaningless ambition. More emotional chaos. It becomes a feedback loop from hell. A young woman spends hours comparing herself to influencers online. She starts believing she is behind in life. Suddenly, her perfectly decent life feels inadequate. Her normal body feels ugly. Her stable income feels embarrassing. Her quiet relationship feels boring. She begins chasing an imaginary standard created by strangers who are also secretly miserable. She buys things she cannot afford to imitate, lifestyles that do not exist. She works longer hours to maintain appearances. Her stress increases. Her debt increases. Her anxiety increases. And eventually she sits in her car crying after posting a smiling photo online because she no longer knows where the performance ends and her real self begins. This is what happens when people care too much about perception. They can survive temporary discomfort for meaningful outcomes. That ability separates reactive lives from intentional lives. Intentional living requires awareness because unconscious habits quietly shape destiny. A person may unconsciously spend years prioritizing validation over peace, comfort over growth, distraction over purpose, and appearances over authenticity, without realizing the long-term emotional cost. But eventually, awareness interrupts the pattern. You begin asking different questions. What actually matters to me? What kind of life feels meaningful beyond social conditioning? What am I sacrificing for approval? What habits are delaying my freedom? What pain am I avoiding that I need to confront? Those questions are transformative because they shift life from autopilot into consciousness, and conscious living changes everything. You stop measuring success only financially. You begin measuring peace, alignment, freedom, integrity, depth of relationships, emotional resilience, presence, because eventually you realize a painful truth. A person can possess enormous external success while internally collapsing, and external collapse is easier to notice than internal collapse. Society sees bankruptcy. Society sees public failure. But invisible emotional emptiness often goes unnoticed for years. A person can smile publicly while privately feeling disconnected from life itself. That is why authenticity matters so deeply. Authenticity reconnects people to themselves. It removes performance, removes exhausting masks, removes the pressure of constantly pretending, and ironically, authentic individuals often become more successful because energy stops leaking into false identities. A person pretending constantly is psychologically exhausted. A person living honestly becomes psychologically lighter. There is freedom in no longer needing to impress everyone, freedom in saying, "This is who I am," freedom in accepting imperfection, freedom in admitting fear without surrendering to it, freedom in choosing peace over performance. At the end of life, people rarely regret not impressing more strangers. They rarely regret not buying more luxury items. They rarely regret not appearing more successful online. They regret abandoning themselves. They regret postponing joy. They regret tolerating meaningless lives because fear controlled them. They regret wasting years seeking approval instead of building authenticity. And perhaps the deepest wisdom of all is realizing that life was never supposed to become perfect before you finally allowed yourself to live it fully. Life is messy, uncertain, temporary, beautiful, painful, meaningful, and once you stop demanding perfection from existence, gratitude becomes possible again. You begin appreciating ordinary moments, morning, sunlight, honest conversations, financial stability, a peaceful mind, time with people you love, the ability to breathe without constant psychological pressure. And maybe that is the final realization most people spend their whole lives searching for. The goal was never to become fearless. The goal was never to become perfect. The goal was never to impress everyone. The goal was to build a life aligned deeply enough with your values that you no longer needed to escape from it. And once you achieve that, even imperfect days begin feeling meaningful. One of the greatest financial freedom principles is incredibly simple. Stop buying things to impress people who are too busy trying to impress other people. Most financial suffering comes from emotional spending, not survival spending. Emotional spending, ego spending, insecurity spending. People destroy years of financial progress because they need to appear successful today. They sacrifice long-term peace for short-term image. Wealth is not about looking rich. Wealth is about needing less. The person who controls their impulses controls their future. The person who can delay gratification gains power over life itself. Real financial freedom is not about owning everything. It is about no longer being emotionally controlled by material cravings. A man earning $50,000 a year with discipline, patience, investments, low debt, and peace of mind is often far freer than a man making $500,000 while drowning in status anxiety, endless expenses, and emotional chaos. Income alone means nothing without internal stability. The problem is that people confuse luxury with fulfillment. But luxury loses emotional impact quickly. Human beings adapt fast. The car becomes normal. The watch becomes normal. The house becomes normal. The salary becomes normal. And once something becomes normal, the mind searches for the next high. This is why people trapped in consumerism are never satisfied. They are addicted to temporary emotional spikes. Happiness is not found in acquiring more. It is found in needing less nonsense to feel complete. There is a reason some of the most peaceful people in the world live very simple lives. Simplicity removes noise. Simplicity creates clarity. Simplicity protects attention. And attention is one of the most valuable currencies on earth. Whatever controls your attention controls your life. If social media controls your attention, it controls your emotions. If consumerism controls your attention, it controls your finances. If fear controls your attention, it controls your decisions. But when you reclaim your attention intentionally, life changes dramatically. You stop reacting emotionally to every opinion. You stop chasing every trend. You stop needing constant reassurance. You stop wasting energy trying to become universally liked. And that is where real power begins. A man who needs nobody's approval walks differently through the world, not arrogantly, not cruelly, calmly. There is a massive difference. Arrogance screams for attention. Confidence does not need to announce itself. Insecure people try to dominate rooms. Secure people simply enter rooms. Insecure people constantly explain themselves. Secure people act. Insecure people chase status symbols. Secure people chase meaning. One day a businessman asked an old billionaire, "What was the greatest investment you ever made?" The young man expected some complex financial answer involving markets, timing, or leverage. But the billionaire smiled and said, learning to say no. That answer confused him, but the billionaire continued, "Every time you say yes to something unimportant, you say no to something important. Every distraction steals a portion of your future. Every unnecessary expense steals a piece of your freedom. Every meaningless relationship drains emotional energy. Success is not built only through what you pursue. It is built through what you ignore. That is the subtle art most people never learn. They think life improves by adding more. But often life improves faster by removing what never mattered. Remove toxic comparison. Remove fake urgency. Remove constant people-pleasing. Remove emotional dependence on external approval. Remove unnecessary consumption. Remove relationships built on performance. Instead of honesty, remove goals that exist only to impress others, and suddenly clarity appears. The strange truth about maturity is that it slowly teaches you how little most things matter. The argument online does not matter. The stranger's opinion does not matter. The luxury purchase designed for validation does not matter. Winning every social competition does not matter. Looking perfect does not matter. What matters is peace. What matters is integrity. What matters is meaningful work. What matters is emotional resilience. What matters is freedom over your mind. And what matters most is learning how to suffer for something worthwhile, because suffering never disappears. It only changes form. An unhealthy person suffers through illness. A healthy person suffers through discipline. A broke person suffers through financial stress. A financially intelligent person suffers through delayed gratification. A lonely person suffers through isolation. A loving person suffers through vulnerability. An unfulfilled person suffers through emptiness. A purposeful person suffers through responsibility. Choose your suffering wisely, because every life contains pain. The only real decision is whether your pain creates growth or destruction. Most people never consciously choose their values. They inherit them. Society hands them a script. Go to school. Get validation. Chase money. Buy status. Avoid failure. Look impressive. Never appear weak. Keep consuming. Keep performing. Keep competing. But eventually intelligent people begin questioning the script. Why am I chasing this? Who told me this mattered? What if success is not what I was taught? What if peace matters more than prestige? What if freedom matters more than appearance? What if meaning matters more than admiration? Those questions terrify people because honest questions destroy comfortable illusions. But illusions are expensive. They cost relationships. They cost mental health. They cost authenticity. They cost decades. One of the most powerful realizations a human being can experience is understanding that life is not asking you to become perfect. Life is asking you to become honest. Honest about your fears. Honest about your insecurities. Honest about your limitations. Honest about what truly matters to you, because once you become honest, your energy stops leaking into performance, and suddenly life becomes lighter. You stop pretending, you stop forcing, you stop chasing identities that do not fit your soul, and ironically, that is often the moment success finally begins appearing naturally, not because you chased it desperately, but because desperation disappeared. There is a quote worth remembering forever. The moment you become comfortable being misunderstood is the moment you become dangerous. Why? Because most people are imprisoned by the fear of judgment. They abandon dreams to avoid criticism. They tolerate toxic jobs to avoid uncertainty. They stay silent to avoid rejection. They hide their true selves to avoid discomfort. But the people who change their lives are the people willing to disappoint others temporarily in order to respect themselves permanently. That takes courage, and courage is not loud. Courage is quietly making difficult decisions while uncertainty screams in your ear. Courage is investing money while others waste theirs on appearances. Courage is saying no when everyone expects yes. Courage is leaving environments that destroy your spirit. Courage is accepting that not everyone will understand your path. Courage is choosing long-term fulfillment over short-term validation. At the end of life, nobody regrets not impressing enough strangers online. Nobody regrets not owning one more luxury item. Nobody regrets missing one more trend. People regret abandoning themselves. They regret never speaking. Honestly, they regret staying trapped in fear. They regret wasting years seeking approval instead of building meaning. And perhaps the greatest tragedy is that many people realize this only after decades disappear. Time is the only currency that never refunds itself. That is why attention matters. That is why emotional discipline matters. That is why financial intelligence matters. That is why learning what deserves your energy matters, because your life becomes whatever repeatedly receives your attention. If your attention goes toward fear, life becomes fear. If your attention goes toward envy, life becomes envy. If your attention goes toward growth, purpose, discipline, and meaningful relationships, life transforms accordingly. The quality of your life depends on the quality of what you choose to care about, and maybe that is the real secret nobody teaches in school. Not every battle deserves your energy. Not every opinion deserves your response. Not every opportunity deserves your attention. Not every desire deserves pursuit. Your power grows every time you consciously decide, this is not worth my peace, because peace is expensive. It costs ego. It costs pride. It costs comparison. It costs the addiction to external validation. But once you pay that price, life becomes infinitely more meaningful, and for the first time in years, maybe even decades, you finally breathe freely again. There comes a moment in every human life when the performance collapses. It may happen quietly in the middle of the night while staring at a dark ceiling, unable to sleep despite complete exhaustion. It may happen after a breakup that tears open every emotional wound you spent years trying to hide. It may happen in a hospital room, a failed business, an empty apartment, or during a random Tuesday afternoon when you suddenly realize you have built an entire life around things that do not actually make you feel alive. And in that moment, something terrifying begins to emerge. Not sadness, not fear, clarity. Clarity is dangerous because once a person truly sees their life honestly, they can never completely unsee it again. A man spent 15 years climbing the corporate ladder. Every promotion made him feel powerful for approximately 3 days before anxiety returned stronger than before. Every salary increase raised his lifestyle expenses. Every achievement created new expectations. He told himself he was winning because everybody around him said he was successful. But deep inside, he constantly felt restless. His mornings felt heavy. His smile became rehearsed. His conversations became transactional. He had become excellent at surviving and terrible at living. One evening, he sat alone in his luxury apartment, eating expensive food while scrolling through emails from people who needed things from him. Suddenly, he realized something horrifying. Nobody actually cared about him. They cared about what he produced, what he earned, what he represented. Even worse, he had spent so many years becoming useful that he forgot how to become human. That realization broke him, but sometimes breaking is necessary because people do not transform when life is comfortable. They transform when illusions stop working. Pain has a strange way of exposing truth. You discover who you are when life stops cooperating with your fantasies. Anybody can feel positive when everything goes according to plan. Anybody can feel confident while receiving applause. Anybody can feel motivated while results are appearing quickly. But real character is revealed in uncertainty, in rejection, in loneliness, in failure, in embarrassment, in delayed gratification. In moments when nothing externally validates your effort and you still continue anyway, that is where identity is forged. Modern culture avoids this truth because struggle is difficult to market. Nobody wants to hear that growth requires discomfort. They want shortcuts, hacks, overnight transformations. They want financial freedom without sacrifice, confidence without rejection, wisdom without suffering, peace without discipline. But life does not work that way. Every meaningful reward carries a hidden price tag. The problem is that most people never consciously choose which pain they are willing to endure. They simply react emotionally to discomfort and spend their lives running from it. A young entrepreneur starts a business because he wants freedom. At first, the idea feels exciting. The dream energizes him. He imagines financial independence, flexibility, recognition, and purpose. But soon reality arrives. Clients disappear. Payments come late. Doubt grows louder. Friends begin questioning his choices. Anxiety enters every morning. And suddenly he faces the truth. Nobody told him freedom is expensive. Freedom demands uncertainty. Freedom demands resilience. Freedom demands the ability to continue despite fear. Most people quit here, not because they are incapable, because they are emotionally unprepared for the discomfort attached to growth. There is a quote worth remembering forever. Everybody wants the results of discipline without the discomfort of discipline, but the discomfort is the process, the pain is the path, the struggle is not evidence you are failing. Often it is evidence you are evolving. The greatest lie people believe is that successful individuals somehow avoid suffering. They don't. They simply suffer more strategically. They choose pain that creates progress instead of pain that creates stagnation. An unhealthy person suffers from exhaustion, disease, insecurity, and low self-respect. A healthy person suffers through workouts, nutritional discipline, consistency, and sacrifice. A financially irresponsible person suffers from debt, stress, dependence, and panic. A financially disciplined person suffers through budgeting, investing, delayed gratification, and saying no. A dishonest person suffers from anxiety, shallow relationships, and emotional fragmentation. An honest person suffers through difficult conversations, vulnerability, and temporary discomfort. Both paths hurt. Choose your hurt wisely. One of the deepest forms of maturity is understanding that happiness is not about eliminating problems. Happiness is about upgrading problems. When people say they want an easy life, what they are really saying is they want life without emotional resistance. But emotional resistance is necessary. Without resistance, human beings become weak, directionless, fragile, entitled. They lose resilience because resilience only develops through challenge. Think about what happens when people receive everything too easily. They become emotionally unstable over minor inconveniences. Tiny frustrations feel catastrophic. Delayed responses trigger anxiety. Criticism feels like violence. Rejection feels like annihilation. Why? Because they never develop psychological endurance. Modern society has become deeply uncomfortable with discomfort itself. And this creates emotionally fragile people pretending to be strong. A woman once spent years carefully constructing the image of a perfect life online. Beautiful photos, expensive vacations, romantic captions, stylish apartments. Every post carefully designed to communicate happiness. Thousands admired her. Many envied her. But privately, she was emotionally collapsing. Her relationship lacked intimacy. Her finances were unstable. Her confidence depended entirely on strangers pressing digital buttons beneath photographs. One night, after posting another smiling picture, she sat alone crying because she realized something devastating. She no longer knew whether she was living her life or marketing it. That is what happens when identity becomes externalized. The more your worth depends on outside validation, the more emotionally enslaved you become. This is why true confidence is quiet. It does not need constant witnesses. It does not need endless reassurance. It does not demand attention every moment. Real confidence is internal stability. It is the ability to respect yourself even when nobody applauds you, and that level of confidence changes everything. A person with internal confidence makes better financial decisions because they do not spend impulsively for validation. They choose investments over appearances, assets over status symbols, freedom over flexing. They understand something most people never learn. Being rich and looking rich are completely different lifestyles. People trying to look rich buy liabilities to impress strangers. People becoming rich by freedom quietly. One man spends his paycheck financing luxury cars, designer clothes, and expensive experiences to maintain an image. Another quietly invests in skills, businesses, index funds, and long-term stability while driving an ordinary vehicle and living below his means. 10 years later, the first man still needs approval to feel important. The second man owns his time. Time ownership is the ultimate luxury, not watches, not cars, not labels. The ability to wake up without fear. Controlling your decisions is wealth. The ability to say no without financial panic is wealth. The ability to spend time with people you love without constantly calculating survival is wealth. Most people sacrifice freedom for appearances because they underestimate how emotionally addictive status becomes. Status temporarily masks insecurity, but eventually the mask cracks because insecurity cannot be solved externally. No amount of money heals. Self-hatred. No amount of attention heals. Emotional emptiness. No amount of luxury heals the fear of inadequacy. That healing requires honesty, and honesty is painful. Honesty forces people to confront uncomfortable truths. Maybe you are chasing goals that are not actually yours. Maybe your ambition is driven by fear rather than purpose. Maybe your relationships are built on performance rather than authenticity. Maybe you spend money emotionally because buying things distracts you from confronting yourself. Maybe your constant busyness is actually avoidance. The human mind is incredibly skilled at creating distractions to avoid truth. People overwork to avoid loneliness. People overconsume to avoid emptiness. People chase relationships to avoid themselves. People obsess over achievement to avoid confronting their insecurities, but eventually, distraction loses effectiveness. Reality waits patiently beneath all noise, and reality asks difficult questions. Who are you without achievements? Who are you without validation? Who are you when nobody is watching? Who are you when life stops rewarding performance? Those questions matter because eventually every external identity collapses, beauty fades, trends disappear, careers change, money fluctuates, social approval shifts constantly, but character remains. That is why the strongest people focus less on image and more on internal architecture. They build emotional resilience, discipline, self-awareness, integrity, financial intelligence, purpose, because these things survive uncertainty. One of the most powerful principles of financial freedom is emotional neutrality. Most people lose money because emotions control their decisions. Fear causes panic selling. Ego causes reckless spending. Envy causes unnecessary purchases. Impatience destroys long-term investing. Emotional instability creates financial instability. The market punishes emotional people. So does life. Emotionally reactive individuals constantly sabotage themselves because they confuse feelings with truth. They make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. They seek immediate relief instead of sustainable growth. But mature individuals understand something critical. Feelings are information, not instructions. Just because you feel insecure does not mean you are worthless. Just because you feel fear does not mean you should stop. Just because you feel discomfort does not mean something is wrong. Sometimes discomfort is evidence you are finally moving in the right direction. A man trying to become financially free often feels fear while investing because uncertainty feels dangerous, but avoiding investment guarantees long-term dependence. A person trying to build meaningful relationships feels vulnerable because honesty risks rejection, but avoiding vulnerability guarantees shallow connection. A person trying to pursue purpose feels anxiety because meaningful work contains uncertainty. But avoiding uncertainty guarantees regret. Growth always feels unstable initially because growth requires leaving familiar limitations behind. There is a strange irony in life. The people who obsessively pursue comfort usually become more anxious. The people willing to tolerate temporary discomfort often create deeper peace. Why? Because avoiding discomfort shrinks your world. Facing discomfort expands it. Every difficult conversation builds courage. Every disciplined financial decision builds freedom. Every rejection survived builds resilience. Every challenge confronted builds identity. And slowly you stop fearing life so much. That changes everything. One day a young man asked an older mentor, "How do I stop being afraid of failure?" The mentor laughed softly and said, "You don't." The young man looked confused. The mentor continued, "Fear never disappears completely. Courage is learning to move while fear talks." That sentence stayed with him for years because most people are waiting for confidence before taking action. But confidence is usually created after action. Nobody feels fully prepared before difficult decisions. Nobody feels completely fearless before risk. The idea that successful people operate without fear is fantasy. They simply stop worshipping fear. Fear becomes background noise instead of leadership, and once fear loses authority, life opens dramatically. You leave environments that destroy your spirit. You stop begging for validation. You stop tolerating relationships built on manipulation. You stop sacrificing your future for temporary approval. You stop wasting years pretending to be someone else. And perhaps most importantly, you stop giving unnecessary emotional energy to things that do not deserve ownership over your mind. This is where peace begins. Not in perfect circumstances, not in total control, not in endless pleasure. Peace begins when your values become stronger than your impulses, when your purpose becomes stronger than distraction, when your discipline becomes stronger than mood, when your self-respect becomes stronger than your need for approval. There is a quote that deserves to be written somewhere visible: "A person who cannot control their attention cannot control their life." Attention is modern currency. Everything wants it. Advertisements want it. Algorithms want it. Politics want it. Social media wants it. Consumer culture wants it. And if you do not consciously direct your attention, someone else will monetize your distraction. That is why disciplined people protect their minds carefully. They understand that every unnecessary emotional reaction drains energy. Every pointless comparison steals joy. Every impulsive purchase delays freedom. Every toxic relationship erodes peace. So they become selective. Selective about what they consume. Selective about who they trust. Selective about what deserves emotional investment. And this selectiveness is not coldness. It is wisdom. Because life is short, pain is guaranteed, time is limited, and energy is sacred. One day you realize something profound. You cannot build a meaningful life while emotionally reacting to everything. You cannot create peace while constantly comparing yourself. You cannot become financially free while spending emotionally. You cannot discover purpose while addicted to distraction. At some point, adulthood becomes less about adding more and more about removing what never mattered. Removing noise, removing ego, removing fake urgency, removing unnecessary drama, removing endless consumption, removing the addiction to being seen, and in that emptiness, something beautiful finally appears: clarity, not the loud kind, the calm kind. The kind that allows you to sit quietly without needing constant stimulation. The kind that allows you to walk away from things that damage your soul. The kind that allows you to define success for yourself instead of borrowing definitions from strangers. And once that clarity arrives, life becomes simpler, not easier, but real. And reality, despite all its discomfort, is infinitely more peaceful than performance. Failure has a language that only certain people learn how to understand. Most people hear failure and immediately translate it as humiliation, rejection, weakness, or proof that they are not good enough. But highly resilient people hear something entirely different. They hear feedback, direction, reality. They understand that failure is not the opposite of success. It is the mechanism that creates it. And this is where modern society completely misunderstands growth. People are taught to avoid failure at all costs. Schools punish mistakes. Families fear embarrassment. Social media glorifies perfection. Everybody wants the polished ending without surviving the messy middle. But life does not reward those who avoid mistakes. Life rewards those who become emotionally capable of learning from them. A young man once dreamed of becoming financially independent before the age of 30. He consumed every motivational video, every business podcast, every investment strategy, every self-help philosophy he could find. He imagined himself escaping the traditional system and building a life of complete freedom. And for a while, his ambition felt intoxicating. He started businesses. He invested money recklessly. He chased trends. He tried cryptocurrency online. Stores, marketing agencies, trading systems, and partnerships with people he barely trusted. Every new opportunity felt like the breakthrough that would finally transform his life. But one by one, things collapsed. Businesses failed. Investments disappeared. Friends betrayed him. Debt increased. Anxiety became constant. And slowly, his confidence began dissolving into exhaustion. At first, he blamed the world. He blamed the economy. He blamed bad luck. He blamed dishonest people. He blamed timing. But eventually, something shifted inside him. He realized he had been chasing outcomes without building character. He wanted wealth without emotional discipline. He wanted freedom without responsibility. He wanted success without patience. He was addicted to the fantasy of success more than the process required to create it. That realization changed everything, because real transformation begins when excuses end. There is a quote that cuts through almost every illusion in life. You cannot change your life while protecting your ego. Ego is expensive. It prevents learning. It rejects criticism. It avoids accountability. It creates fake superiority to hide insecurity. And perhaps most dangerously, ego convinces people they are already wiser than they actually are. That is why some people stay emotionally stuck for decades. They never develop the humility necessary for growth. Instead of asking, "What can I learn from this?" they ask, "Who can I blame for this?" Victim mentality feels comforting temporarily because it protects self-image. If everything is always someone else's fault, then you never have to confront your weaknesses. But this comfort becomes poisonous long-term because it destroys personal power. Responsibility is heavy, but power lives inside responsibility. The moment you genuinely accept responsibility for your decisions, habits, emotions, finances, and direction, your life changes. Because now improvement becomes possible. That does not mean every painful thing happening to you is your fault. Life is unfair sometimes. People betray, economies collapse, relationships fail, tragedies happen. But even when circumstances are unfair, your response still belongs to you, and that response determines your future. One of the biggest differences between emotionally weak people and emotionally strong people is that weak individuals believe discomfort is evidence they should stop, while strong individuals understand discomfort is often evidence they are growing. Think about financial freedom. Most people romanticize the outcome but hate the process. They love imagining passive income, investments, and independence. But they resist budgeting. They resist delayed gratification. They resist learning difficult skills. They resist uncertainty. They want the reward without becoming the person capable of sustaining the reward, but wealth built without discipline disappears quickly. That is why many lottery winners eventually become broke again. Money amplifies identity. If someone lacks emotional control before wealth, wealth magnifies their chaos. Larger income with poor discipline simply creates larger mistakes. A disciplined person can create wealth slowly and sustainably. An undisciplined person can lose wealth rapidly and repeatedly. That is why financial intelligence is not merely mathematical. It is psychological. Money reveals emotional habits. An impulsive person spends impulsively. An insecure person spends emotionally. An impatient person invests recklessly. A fearful person avoids opportunities entirely. And a disciplined person gradually builds freedom brick by brick, while everybody else searches for shortcuts. There is something deeply powerful about slow progress. Modern culture worships speed because speed creates excitement. But real stability is usually built quietly over long periods of consistency. A healthy body is built through repeated discipline. A strong relationship is built through repeated honesty. A peaceful mind is built through repeated self-awareness. Financial freedom is built through repeated intelligent decisions. Small choices repeated consistently shape entire destinies. The problem is that consistency feels boring. People underestimate boring things, but boring things create extraordinary results. A man who invests a reasonable amount every month for 20 years may not look impressive today. Nobody applauds him for quietly building index funds or learning financial literacy after work. But eventually, time rewards discipline in ways emotion never can. Meanwhile, another man constantly chases exciting opportunities. He jumps from trend to trend. He spends impulsively whenever emotions rise. He wants rapid success because patience feels too slow for his ego. Years pass. Anxiety grows. Stability never arrives. Excitement and progress are not always the same thing. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is continue showing up quietly while everyone else chases emotional highs, because emotional highs are addictive. People become addicted to motivation itself. They love feeling inspired. They love big announcements. They love dramatic beginnings. But meaningful lives are not built in dramatic beginnings. They are built in ordinary daily decisions repeated consistently long after excitement disappears. That is where identity forms, not in moments of hype. In moments of discipline. A writer becomes a writer by writing when uninspired. Or an investor becomes wealthy by remaining patient during uncertainty. A healthy person becomes healthy by maintaining habits when nobody is watching. A strong relationship survives because people choose honesty during uncomfortable conversations instead of avoiding them. Real growth is deeply unglamorous most of the time, and because it is unglamorous, many people never stay committed long enough to experience its rewards. One evening, an exhausted entrepreneur sat alone reviewing years of failure. Businesses that collapsed, partnerships destroyed, opportunities wasted, embarrassing mistakes, public failures, financial stress. He felt broken, but then he noticed something strange. Despite all the losses, he had developed skills, resilience, patience, emotional control, wisdom about people, wisdom about money, wisdom about himself. The failures that once seemed meaningless had quietly transformed him into someone stronger. And suddenly he understood something profound. Life was never only teaching him how to make money. Life was teaching him how to become someone capable of handling success responsibly. That distinction matters because success without emotional maturity destroys people. Fame destroys insecure people. Money destroys impulsive people. Power destroys dishonest people. Attention destroys narcissistic people. The external world amplifies whatever already exists internally. This is why self-awareness matters more than appearance. A calm mind creates better decisions. Better decisions create better outcomes. Better outcomes create sustainable confidence, and sustainable confidence creates freedom. Not the loud confidence social media sells, not fake positivity, not arrogance disguised as ambition. Real confidence, the kind built through surviving difficult realities honestly, the kind built through keeping promises to yourself, the kind built through knowing that even if life becomes difficult again, you can handle it. That type of confidence cannot be purchased. It must be earned. One of the strangest truths about adulthood is realizing how many people never truly know themselves. They inherit identities from parents, culture, trends, or fear. They pursue careers because society approves. They maintain relationships because loneliness scares them. They buy things because status seduces them. They repeat routines because uncertainty terrifies them. But eventually a quiet emptiness begins whispering inside them. Because deep down they know they are disconnected from themselves, and disconnection creates suffering. A person disconnected from themselves constantly seeks distraction because silence feels uncomfortable. Silence exposes unresolved emotions, unresolved fears, unresolved insecurities. So they remain busy, constantly stimulated, constantly entertained, constantly consuming. But peace never arrives because distraction only postpones self-confrontation. There is a reason some people cannot sit quietly without reaching for their phones. They are not addicted to technology. They are addicted to escaping themselves. That is why solitude becomes transformational, not isolation, intentional solitude, moments where you honestly observe your mind without performance, without validation, without distraction, without pretending, because eventually you begin noticing patterns. You notice what truly matters to you. You notice how much energy fear has stolen. You notice how often insecurity influences decisions. You notice how frequently you seek approval, and slowly, awareness creates freedom. Awareness is the beginning of all transformation. A person cannot change patterns they refuse to acknowledge. That is why honest self-reflection is more valuable than endless motivation. Motivation fades, self-awareness evolves. There is also another uncomfortable truth people avoid: not everybody will understand your growth. The moment you begin changing your values, certain relationships become uncomfortable. People who benefited from your insecurity may dislike your confidence. People comfortable with mediocrity may resent your discipline. People addicted to chaos may feel threatened by your peace. Growth changes relationship dynamics, and this creates painful decisions. Sometimes becoming healthier means disappointing people. Sometimes becoming financially disciplined means saying no when others expect yes. Sometimes becoming emotionally mature means leaving environments that normalize dysfunction. And those decisions hurt, but temporary loneliness is often necessary for long-term alignment. One of the greatest acts of self-respect is refusing to betray your future for temporary acceptance. Weak people seek belonging at any cost. Strong people seek alignment even when belonging becomes uncertain. That difference changes entire lives. A man once asked a mentor, "How do I know if I'm finally growing?" The mentor smiled and answered, "When your old habits begin feeling uncomfortable." That answer stayed with him, because growth often feels less like becoming someone new and more like outgrowing what no longer fits your spirit. You stop enjoying shallow conversations. You stop needing constant validation. You stop chasing every opportunity. You stop reacting emotionally to every criticism. You stop spending money to impress strangers. You stop sacrificing peace for appearances. And slowly your life becomes simpler, not smaller, cleaner, more intentional, more honest, more peaceful. One of the most underrated financial freedom principles is reducing unnecessary complexity. Complex lives create emotional chaos. Too many subscriptions, too many expenses, too many distractions, too many obligations, too many attempts to maintain appearances. Simplicity creates clarity. Clarity creates control. Control creates freedom. The wealthiest people, mentally, are often not the people with the most possessions. They are the people with the fewest internal conflicts. Internal peace is an underrated form of wealth. Imagine waking up without needing to prove yourself. Imagine making decisions without fear of judgment controlling you. Imagine having enough discipline to trust yourself. Imagine having enough emotional stability to survive uncertainty calmly. Imagine building a life based on values instead of comparison. That is real success, and ironically, many people only begin discovering it after failure destroys their illusions. Failure strips away fantasy. It exposes weak foundations. It forces re-evaluation, and painful as it feels, re-evaluation is often the beginning of wisdom, because wisdom is not created through comfort. Wisdom is created through experience, honestly processed. A person who never confronts difficulty often remains emotionally shallow, but someone who survives loss, uncertainty, heartbreak, rejection, financial struggle, embarrassment, and rebuilding develops depth, compassion, perspective, resilience. Pain either hardens people or deepens them. The difference depends on whether they choose bitterness or growth. There is a quote worth carrying through life: "The strongest people are not those who avoid storms. They are those who learn how to walk through them without losing themselves." That is the real challenge, not avoiding difficulty, not controlling every outcome, but remaining aligned with your values while life becomes uncertain, because uncertainty never disappears. There will always be another problem, another challenge, another fear, another risk, but eventually, mature people stop asking life to become easier and start becoming stronger themselves, and that shift changes everything. Because once you stop expecting comfort from life, you stop feeling betrayed by reality. You stop acting shocked when pain appears. You stop believing difficulty means failure. You stop wasting emotional energy resisting unavoidable struggles. Instead, you begin asking a far more powerful question: is this pain building me or destroying me? That question can transform an entire future. Because the quality of your life depends less on avoiding struggle and more on choosing meaningful struggle wisely, and once you understand that, you stop running from discomfort and start building a life worth suffering for. There is a dangerous illusion that quietly controls millions of lives, and the illusion is this: people believe they need to become someone else before they can finally feel worthy. So they spend years constructing artificial versions of themselves. More successful, more attractive, more admired, more intelligent, more accomplished, more socially accepted. Their entire existence becomes a non-stop self-improvement project, driven not by love but by inadequacy. And because inadequacy can never be permanently solved externally, they remain trapped in a cycle of endless striving without inner peace. A man spends years trying to become respected because deep down he feels invisible. A woman obsesses over perfection because internally she fears rejection. Another person pursues endless wealth because poverty once humiliated them emotionally. And while ambition itself is not the enemy, unconscious ambition is dangerous because it transforms life into emotional compensation instead of meaningful creation. Most people are not chasing dreams, they are chasing relief, relief from insecurity, relief from shame, relief from fear, relief from feeling not enough, and that changes everything. Because when your goals are driven by emotional emptiness, achievement becomes addictive instead of fulfilling. No amount is ever enough. 1. Accomplishment temporarily silences insecurity, but soon another craving appears. Another comparison, another fear, another need to prove yourself. That is why some highly successful people remain deeply unhappy. They built external success on top of unresolved internal instability. One billionaire admitted privately after decades of financial domination, "I thought money would make me feel safe forever. Instead, it made me terrified of losing everything." That sentence contains more wisdom than most motivational speeches, because fear does not disappear automatically with achievement. In many cases, achievement magnifies fear. The more people build identities around external success, the more terrified they become of failure. A person who bases their worth on beauty fears aging. A person who bases their worth on status fears irrelevance. A person who bases their worth on money fears financial decline. A person who bases their worth on approval fears criticism. And this is why emotional freedom matters more than external success. External success without emotional freedom creates fragile identities hiding behind impressive appearances. The strongest individuals are not those who possess the most, they are those who need the least validation to remain at peace. There is something incredibly powerful about a person who no longer needs to constantly prove themselves. They move differently through life, calmly, intentionally, without desperation. They stop arguing unnecessarily, stop chasing attention, stop forcing relationships, stop competing in meaningless social games. Their energy becomes focused instead of scattered. And focus is a superpower, especially in modern society, because modern society is engineered to destroy focus. Every platform competes for attention. Every advertisement manipulates insecurity. Every trend pressures people to compare themselves constantly. The average person wakes up and immediately enters a psychological battlefield without even realizing it. Notifications, news, messages, opinions, expectations, artificial urgency, emotional stimulation everywhere. The mind never rests, and an exhausted mind makes poor decisions. Poor emotional decisions, poor financial decisions, poor relationship decisions. That is why intentional silence has become revolutionary. A successful investor once explained his daily routine very simply: "I spend several hours every day thinking quietly." Most people cannot do this anymore. They are too addicted to stimulation, and he was right. Most people are uncomfortable being alone with their thoughts because silence exposes unresolved truths. Silence reveals emotional dependency, hidden anxiety, suppressed fears, unprocessed pain. So people keep themselves distracted. Constant entertainment, constant scrolling, constant busyness, but distraction delays growth because growth requires awareness. Awareness is painful initially. You begin noticing how many of your habits are emotionally driven. You notice how often you seek approval. You notice how frequently fear controls your choices. You notice how much money disappears into meaningless consumption. You notice how many relationships survive only because authenticity is absent. And perhaps, most painfully, you notice how much time has been wasted performing instead of living. That realization hurts, but pain that reveals truth is useful pain. There is a quote worth remembering: your life changes the moment you stop lying to yourself, because self-deception is expensive. A person pretending to enjoy a career they secretly hate slowly destroys themselves psychologically. A person pretending a toxic relationship is healthy slowly loses self-respect. A person pretending materialism creates happiness slowly becomes emotionally hollow. A person pretending exhaustion is ambition slowly burns out internally. Truth liberates. But first it disrupts. That disruption is necessary because false identities eventually collapse anyway. One day a young lawyer sat in his expensive office, staring out the window at the city skyline. On paper, his life looked impressive. High salary, prestigious career, luxury apartment, social status. But internally, he felt disconnected from himself. Every morning required emotional force just to continue functioning. He had spent so many years pursuing what looked successful that he never stopped to ask whether it actually aligned with who he was. That question haunted him, and eventually he left, not because he suddenly became fearless, because the pain of self-betrayal became greater than the fear of uncertainty. That is often how transformation begins, not with inspiration, with exhaustion. Exhaustion from pretending, exhaustion from performing, exhaustion from abandoning yourself repeatedly. People assume confidence creates action, but often honesty creates action first. Once you become honest about your misery, your misalignment, your emotional chaos, change becomes unavoidable. And honesty requires courage because honesty disrupts comfort. It may force you to leave environments that no longer fit your values. It may force you to disappoint people who benefited from your insecurity. It may force you to rebuild your life from the ground up. But rebuilding honestly is infinitely better than maintaining a lie comfortably. One of the greatest financial freedom principles is understanding the emotional cost of lifestyle inflation. Most people increase expenses every time income rises, because they subconsciously believe external upgrades will create internal satisfaction. Bigger homes, better cars, more luxury, more status. But every increase in lifestyle also increases psychological pressure. More bills, more maintenance, more dependency on income, more fear of losing status, and eventually people become trapped by the very lifestyle they once dreamed about. Freedom disappears beneath appearances. A person earning modest income with low expenses, investments, discipline, and emotional peace often experiences far greater freedom than a person earning enormous income while drowning in obligations and image maintenance. The goal is not merely earning more, the goal is needing less emotional validation from what you earn. That distinction changes everything, because once your identity no longer depends on external appearance, financial decisions become clearer. You stop buying emotionally, you stop competing socially, you stop using money as therapy, and this creates enormous long-term power. A disciplined mind compounds wealth faster than a high income attached to emotional instability. There is another uncomfortable truth many people avoid: envy destroys peace. Modern life constantly encourages comparison. People compare careers, relationships, vacations, appearance, income, followers, achievements, lifestyles. And comparison quietly poisons gratitude because attention shifts from what exists to what appears missing. But comparison is psychologically irrational because you are comparing your internal reality to someone else's external presentation. You rarely see their fear, their debt, their anxiety, their loneliness, their confusion. You only see curated fragments. And people destroy perfectly meaningful lives, chasing illusions built from fragments. A farmer once sat peacefully outside his modest home, watching the sunset after a long day of work. A wealthy businessman visiting the countryside asked him, "Why don't you expand your farm, earn more money, and become successful?" The farmer smiled gently and asked, "And then what?" The businessman replied, "Then you could relax and enjoy life." The farmer looked around peacefully and said, "What do you think I'm doing right now?" That story contains a brutal truth modern culture struggles to accept. More is not always better. Sometimes more creates more anxiety, more complexity, more distraction, more pressure, more emptiness disguised as achievement. This does not mean ambition is wrong. Meaningful ambition can create beautiful things. Businesses, art, innovation, opportunities, generational wealth, purposeful impact. But healthy ambition emerges from creation, not compensation. From alignment, not insecurity. There is a massive difference between pursuing excellence because it fulfills your spirit and pursuing success because you are terrified of feeling ordinary. One path creates meaning, the other creates endless exhaustion. People who are emotionally addicted to external validation never truly rest. Even vacations become performances. Even relationships become branding opportunities. Even achievements lose emotional impact quickly because identity remains unstable. That is why inner stability matters more than outward appearance. Inner stability allows patience. Patience allows intelligent investing. Patience allows thoughtful decisions. Patience allows emotional resilience during uncertainty, and emotional resilience is perhaps the most underrated financial skill in existence. Most people fail financially not because they lack opportunity, but because emotions repeatedly sabotage long-term thinking. Fear causes panic, greed causes recklessness, insecurity causes overspending, impatience destroys consistency, discipline solves problems emotions create. A man investing consistently for decades may appear boring compared to people chasing rapid wealth online, but boring strategies often build sustainable freedom, while emotional excitement destroys it. Long-term thinking is rare because modern culture trains people to prioritize immediate stimulation over future stability. But mature individuals begin understanding the power of delayed gratification. Every disciplined decision plants seeds invisible initially. Savings become security, investments become freedom, habits become identity, and identity shapes destiny. That is why small decisions matter enormously. A person who repeatedly chooses temporary comfort eventually creates long-term suffering. A person who repeatedly chooses temporary discipline often creates long-term peace. This applies everywhere. Health, money, relationships, mental stability, purpose, everything compounds, and the frightening reality is that most people do not notice the consequences of their habits until years later. Tiny, repeated choices silently construct entire futures. One impulsive purchase seems harmless, one avoided conversation seems harmless, one distracted evening seems harmless, one compromised value seems harmless, but repeated consistently, these patterns shape identity. That is why self-respect is built through small actions. Keeping promises to yourself, managing money responsibly, protecting your attention intentionally, leaving environments that destroy peace, speaking honestly even when uncomfortable, choosing long-term alignment over short-term approval. These moments appear insignificant individually, but together they define a life. A mentor once told his student, "Your future is hidden inside your daily routine." At first, the student dismissed the statement because it sounded overly simple, but years later he understood its depth. The quality of a person's future rarely depends on one dramatic moment. It depends on repeated ordinary behaviors. Discipline compounds. Neglect compounds. Focus compounds. Distraction compounds. Everything compounds. That is why attention is sacred. Where attention goes, life follows. If your attention constantly chases drama, your life becomes chaotic. If your attention constantly chases envy, your life becomes inadequate. If your attention constantly chases purpose, discipline, and meaningful growth, your life evolves accordingly. Attention is not merely observation. Attention is construction. You become what repeatedly occupies your mind, and perhaps this is why peace feels so rare now. Modern life fragments attention constantly. People struggle to remain present because their minds are overloaded with comparison, stimulation, fear, and artificial urgency. But clarity returns when distractions decrease. Clarity returns when values become intentional. Clarity returns when you stop asking, "How can I impress people?" and start asking, "What kind of life actually feels meaningful to me?" That question changes priorities dramatically. Suddenly, health matters more than appearance, peace matters more than status, freedom matters more than luxury, depth matters more than popularity, authenticity matters more than approval, and strangely enough, once people stop desperately trying to impress everyone, they often become more magnetic naturally. Because authenticity carries emotional weight, performance never can. People trust realness. People feel calm around emotionally grounded individuals. People are inspired by those who no longer need constant validation. Because emotional independence is rare, Very rare, and rare qualities always carry value. One day you eventually realize that life is not asking you to become perfect. Life is asking you to become honest enough to build a reality that no longer requires constant escape. That is the real goal. Not endless pleasure, not permanent happiness, but a life you no longer feel the need to avoid, and once you begin building that kind of life intentionally, something extraordinary happens. You stop merely surviving and finally begin living. There is a moment in every person's life when they begin realizing that being busy and being fulfilled are completely different experiences. For years, people confuse movement with meaning. They fill calendars, answer emails, chase deadlines, attend meetings, maintain appearances, scroll endlessly, consume constantly, and tell themselves they are progressing simply because they are exhausted. But exhaustion is not proof of purpose. Burnout is not proof of importance. And movement without direction only creates sophisticated forms of emptiness. A man once spent nearly 20 years waking up at 5 o'clock every morning to build what everyone around him called a successful life. He worked relentlessly. Promotions came, his income multiplied. He bought the house society told him to buy. He drove the car that signaled achievement. He wore the expensive suits that communicated status before he even spoke. And every time he reached a milestone, people congratulated him as if he had unlocked another level of existence. But late at night, after the noise disappeared, he often sat silently wondering why his victories felt emotionally hollow so quickly. One evening, his young daughter asked him a simple question: "Why are you always working?" He laughed at first and answered automatically, "For the family." But the question stayed in his mind long after the conversation ended, because deep inside, he realized something uncomfortable. He no longer knew whether he was working to support life or escaping from it. His ambition had become automatic, unquestioned, mechanical. He was running so fast that he forgot to ask whether the direction still made sense. That happens to people more often than they admit. Human beings are incredibly capable of adapting to emotional dissatisfaction while appearing functional externally. People normalize stress until they cannot remember what calm feels like. They normalize anxiety until peace feels unfamiliar. They normalize emotional numbness until genuine joy feels suspicious. And perhaps the most dangerous normalization of all is the normalization of self-betrayal. People betray themselves quietly every day. They stay in environments that destroy their spirit because fear makes uncertainty feel dangerous. They suppress honest emotions because they want approval. They spend money irresponsibly because they want to appear successful. They chase lifestyles they secretly do not even enjoy because society conditioned them to associate appearance with value, and slowly, almost invisibly, they drift further away from themselves. One of the most painful realizations in adulthood is understanding how easily a person can lose years pursuing things that never truly mattered to them. The frightening part is not failure. Failure can teach wisdom. The frightening part is unconscious success. Succeeding at goals that do not actually align with your soul. A person can spend decades climbing the wrong mountain. That is why self-awareness matters more than raw ambition. Without self-awareness, ambition becomes dangerous because it magnifies confusion. A highly driven person lacking self-awareness can build an entire life around fear, insecurity, comparison, or emotional compensation while calling it success. One entrepreneur became obsessed with becoming wealthy after growing up in financial instability. As a child, he watched his parents argue constantly about money. He witnessed stress, uncertainty, and humiliation surrounding bills and debt. So he made a silent promise to himself he would become rich enough to never feel powerless again, and for years, that fear fueled him. Fear woke him up early, fear kept him working late, fear made him ruthless, fear helped him build enormous wealth. But eventually, despite the money, the fear remained. Because his problem was never only financial insecurity, it was emotional insecurity. He thought money would erase fear permanently, but unresolved fear simply adapts to new environments. Instead of fearing poverty, he now feared losing status, losing success, losing relevance, losing control. That is the trap of external solutions to internal problems. External achievements can improve circumstances, but they cannot automatically heal identity. Identity work is internal, and internal work requires honesty. Most people avoid for years. There is a quote worth carrying forever: a person who avoids uncomfortable truths eventually lives uncomfortable realities. Truth has a cost, but avoidance costs far more. A woman spent years pretending her relationship was healthy because leaving felt terrifying. The relationship looked perfect publicly. Friends admired them. Their photos radiated happiness. But privately, communication had collapsed long ago. They were emotionally disconnected roommates performing romance for appearances. Every year she delayed honesty, her anxiety deepened. Her confidence weakened. Her spirit slowly disappeared beneath routine and fear. One day she finally admitted the truth to herself. She was not afraid of leaving the relationship. She was afraid of rebuilding her identity afterward. That realization changed everything, because many people remain trapped, not because situations are impossible to change, but because uncertainty threatens identities they have grown emotionally attached to. The familiar feels psychologically safe even when it is unhealthy. That applies to relationships, careers, financial habits, self-image, everything. Human beings often prefer familiar suffering over unfamiliar growth. Why? Because growth requires temporary instability, and instability terrifies the ego. The ego craves certainty, validation, and control. It wants guarantees before action. It wants reassurance before risk. It wants comfort before transformation, but life never provides permanent guarantees. That is why courage matters so much. Not dramatic courage, quiet courage, the courage to be honest with yourself. The courage to disappoint people respectfully, the courage to begin again, the courage to invest in long-term peace instead of short-term image. A man once asked a financially successful mentor, "What is the biggest mistake people make with money?" The mentor answered immediately, "They use money to purchase identity instead of freedom." That sentence contains enormous wisdom. Most people spend financially to feel emotionally significant. Luxury becomes psychological compensation. Spending becomes emotional therapy. Purchases become attempts to repair insecurity temporarily, and because insecurity cannot be permanently solved externally, consumption never ends. New car, new house, new phone, new watch, new vacation, new status symbol, temporary excitement, then emotional emptiness returns quietly again. This is why financial freedom requires emotional discipline. Without emotional discipline, higher income simply funds larger distractions. A person earning modest income with discipline can build freedom. A person earning enormous income with emotional instability can remain financially trapped forever. Income matters, but behavior matters more. The strongest financial position in the world is not merely wealth. It is psychological independence from social pressure. The ability to say, "I do not need to impress anyone to feel valuable." That mindset changes spending entirely. You stop buying emotionally. You stop competing socially. You stop financing appearances. You begin thinking long-term. You prioritize investments over ego, assets over attention, freedom over flexing, and slowly your financial life becomes calmer. Because your emotional life becomes calmer. There is a direct relationship between inner chaos and external chaos. Emotionally chaotic people usually create financially chaotic lives. Impulsive emotions create impulsive decisions. Fear creates avoidance. Envy creates overspending. Insecurity creates performance. But emotional clarity creates strategic thinking, and strategic thinking compounds powerfully over time. One of the most underrated principles of success is patience. Modern culture glorifies speed because speed feels exciting, but sustainable growth is often painfully slow initially. Investments grow slowly. Trust grows slowly. Mastery grows slowly. Reputation grows slowly. Meaningful relationships deepen slowly. Nature itself teaches this principle constantly. Trees do not become massive overnight. Muscles do not develop overnight. Wisdom does not emerge overnight, but modern minds struggle with patience because they are overstimulated by instant gratification. Everything arrives quickly now: entertainment, validation, purchases, information, attention, and because people become conditioned to immediacy, long-term effort feels emotionally uncomfortable. This destroys countless opportunities. People quit businesses too early, quit relationships too early, quit learning too early, quit investing too early, quit transforming too early, not because success was impossible, because patience felt emotionally intolerable. There is a reason disciplined individuals appear calmer than emotionally reactive individuals. Discipline reduces chaos. Discipline simplifies decision-making. Discipline creates predictability, and predictability creates psychological stability. Imagine two people. The first person spends impulsively whenever emotions rise. Their finances fluctuate constantly. Their health habits change weekly. Their mood controls productivity. Their attention constantly shifts. Life feels unstable because internal leadership is weak. The second person develops systems, budgets, habits, routines, boundaries, intentional focus. They still experience emotions, fear, and uncertainty like everyone else, but emotions no longer control every decision. Which person builds peace faster? Obviously the second. Because freedom is not created through emotional impulses, freedom is created through repeated, intentional behavior. There is another uncomfortable truth people eventually confront. Not everybody deserves access to your energy. Some relationships drain life instead of supporting it. Some people normalize negativity, chaos, manipulation, or constant emotional dependence. And highly empathetic individuals often tolerate these dynamics too long because they confuse self-sacrifice with love, but protecting your peace is not selfish. It is necessary. You cannot build a meaningful life while constantly surrounded by people committed to dysfunction. One mentor explained it beautifully. Your environment either fuels your growth or feeds your destruction. Environment matters enormously. Financial habits spread socially, mindsets spread socially, standards spread socially, ambition spreads socially. So does mediocrity. So does victim mentality. So does emotional chaos. That is why intentional people become careful about proximity. Not from arrogance, from awareness, because eventually you realize that life is too short to spend years shrinking yourself to fit environments you have already outgrown. Growth changes relationships naturally. Some people celebrate your evolution. Others resent it, and maturity is learning to continue evolving without becoming bitter about either response. A woman once said after rebuilding her life, the hardest part was realizing I had to stop asking everyone for permission to become myself. That sentence resonates deeply because many people unconsciously seek approval before changing. Approval before setting boundaries. Approval before pursuing dreams. Approval before leaving unhealthy situations. Approval before becoming authentic. But authentic living rarely receives universal approval. Some people preferred the version of you that lacked boundaries. Some preferred the version of you that tolerated disrespect. Some preferred the version of you driven by insecurity because insecurity made you easier to control. Growth disrupts familiar dynamics, and disruption often reveals who truly supports your well-being versus who only supported your convenience. One of the clearest signs of emotional maturity is no longer needing everyone to understand your decisions. Immature people constantly explain themselves because they seek validation. Mature people recognize that misunderstanding is part of life. Not everybody will understand your path, and that is okay. You are not responsible for managing everyone's perception of you. You are responsible for managing your integrity. That distinction creates enormous emotional freedom, because once you stop needing universal approval, fear loses enormous power over your choices. You begin making decisions based on alignment instead of appearance. And alignment creates peace, not instant pleasure, not constant happiness. Peace, the deep kind, the kind that allows you to sleep without pretending. The kind that allows you to sit alone without needing distraction constantly. The kind that allows you to wake up without resenting your own life. There is something profoundly powerful about building a life that no longer requires emotional escape. A life where your habits align with your values, your finances align with your goals, your relationships align with honesty, your work aligns with purpose. Perfection is impossible, but alignment is transformative, and alignment begins with difficult questions. What am I pretending not to know? What am I tolerating that is destroying me? What habits are delaying my freedom? What fears are controlling my choices? What actually matters to me beyond social conditioning? Those questions are uncomfortable. But uncomfortable questions create honest lives, and honest lives create internal peace that external validation never can. At some point, every mature person realizes that life is not about becoming superior to others. It is about becoming more honest with yourself, more disciplined with your energy, more intentional with your attention, more protective of your peace, more patient with growth, more courageous with truth. And once that realization settles deeply into your spirit, something extraordinary happens. You stop chasing life desperately and begin building it consciously. The strange thing about life is that most people spend years trying to control everything, only to eventually discover that peace was never hiding inside control. Peace was hiding inside acceptance. Acceptance of uncertainty, acceptance of imperfection, acceptance of pain, acceptance of limitation, acceptance that life will never permanently arrange itself according to personal preferences. And the moment a person truly understands this, something inside them relaxes for the first time in years. Because exhausting yourself trying to control every outcome is one of the fastest ways to destroy your relationship with life itself. A man once spent nearly his entire adulthood trying to create the perfect future. He planned obsessively, calculated endlessly, worked constantly. Every decision revolved around maximizing security and minimizing risk. He wanted enough money to feel untouchable, enough success to feel respected, enough structure to eliminate uncertainty forever. But no matter how much he achieved, his anxiety never disappeared. Every solved problem created another fear. Every milestone created another pressure. And eventually, sitting alone after another sleepless night, he realized a painful truth. He had sacrificed the present trying to emotionally insure himself against the future. That realization broke something open inside him, because for the first time, he understood that life was never asking him to become invincible. Life was asking him to become adaptable. There is enormous freedom in adaptability. Rigid people break under pressure because reality never fully obeys expectations. Flexible people survive because they understand that uncertainty is not an interruption of life. Uncertainty is life, and once you stop demanding certainty before action, courage becomes possible. Most people are waiting for fear to disappear before they finally live honestly. But fear does not disappear permanently. Fear evolves. Fear changes shape. Fear follows every meaningful level of growth because growth always contains uncertainty. The fear of failure becomes the fear of success. The fear of poverty becomes the fear of losing wealth. The fear of loneliness becomes the fear of vulnerability. The fear never fully leaves, but mature individuals stop worshipping fear as truth. They begin seeing fear as a natural companion of meaningful living instead of evidence they should stop. That shift changes everything. A young woman dreamed of becoming financially independent and building a life based on freedom instead of survival. But every time she considered starting her business, fear appeared. Fear of judgment, fear of instability, fear of making mistakes publicly. So for years, she delayed action while consuming endless motivational content, hoping confidence would arrive first. It never did. One day, she finally realized something simple but transformative. Confidence is not built before difficult action. Confidence is built because of difficult action. Every uncomfortable step survived strengthens identity. Every risk confronted increases self-trust. Every failure processed honestly develops resilience. Self-trust changes lives, because once you trust yourself, uncertainty loses much of its terror. You begin understanding that even if things go wrong, you can adapt, you can rebuild, you can recover, and recovery is a far more valuable skill than control. Many people destroy their peace because they believe mistakes are catastrophic. They treat failure as identity instead of experience. A failed business becomes I am a failure, a broken relationship becomes I am unlovable, financial hardship becomes I am weak, but experiences are not identities, they are teachers, and people who learn from painful experiences often become wiser than people who spent years avoiding discomfort entirely. There is a quote that captures this perfectly. Rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. Most people fear collapse because they assume collapse only destroys. But sometimes collapse removes illusions that comfort was protecting. A failed relationship may expose unhealthy patterns you ignored for years. Financial struggle may teach discipline you never developed during comfort. Loneliness may force self-awareness you avoided through distraction. Rejection may redirect you toward authenticity. Pain has a brutal honesty that comfort often lacks, and honest pain can become transformational when processed consciously instead of resentfully. One of the greatest differences between emotionally mature people and emotionally immature people is their relationship with suffering. Immature individuals believe suffering should not exist. Mature individuals understand suffering is unavoidable and focus instead on creating meaning through it. Meaning changes pain completely. A parent willingly sacrifices sleep, energy, and comfort for a child because love creates meaning. An entrepreneur willingly tolerates uncertainty because purpose creates meaning. An athlete willingly embraces exhaustion because growth creates meaning. Pain without meaning feels unbearable. Pain connected to purpose becomes survivable. This is why shallow goals often create shallow fulfillment. Chasing money only for status eventually feels empty because status lacks depth. Chasing approval eventually feels exhausting because approval constantly shifts. Chasing appearances eventually creates emotional fragility because identity becomes dependent on external perception. But meaningful goals create deeper stability, building freedom for your family, creating work aligned with your values, developing emotional resilience, contributing something valuable to the world, growing into someone you genuinely respect. These pursuits sustain people because they connect suffering to purpose. And purpose transforms endurance. One elderly man near the end of his life was asked what mattered most after decades of success, struggle, victories, and loss. His answer was unexpectedly simple. Peace of mind, he said quietly. Everything else comes and goes. That answer carries profound wisdom because eventually people realize how temporary most external things are. Trends disappear. Markets fluctuate. Beauty changes. Attention fades. Status shifts constantly. Even achievements lose emotional intensity over time. But internal peace fundamentally changes the quality of existence itself. A peaceful person experiences life differently. They are less reactive, less desperate, less controlled by comparison, less manipulated by social pressure, and because they are less emotionally chaotic, they make clearer decisions. Clarity is priceless, especially financially. One of the greatest financial freedom principles is emotional detachment from appearances. Most financial destruction comes not from lack of intelligence, but from emotional decision-making. People buy things to soothe insecurity. They overspend to maintain status. They avoid investing because fear creates paralysis. They seek instant gratification because patience feels emotionally uncomfortable. Emotion repeatedly sabotages long-term prosperity, but emotionally disciplined individuals understand something powerful. Every dollar spent represents stored life energy, time, effort, attention, sacrifice. And once you begin viewing money as life energy rather than status currency, spending habits change dramatically. You become more intentional, more patient, more strategic. You stop asking, will this impress people? And begin asking, will this increase freedom? That question transforms financial behavior completely. Freedom-focused individuals prioritize ownership over appearance, assets over liabilities, skills over status symbols, long-term security over temporary attention, and over time, these choices compound quietly into independence. Meanwhile, many people remain trapped because they continually sacrifice tomorrow's peace for today's image. Image is expensive. Freedom is priceless. A man earning average income but living below his means, investing consistently, and protecting his peace may possess more actual freedom than someone earning millions while emotionally enslaved to status maintenance. Because freedom is not measured only by income. Freedom is measured by how much control you have over your time, decisions, attention, and emotional state. There is another truth people eventually confront. Attention is life itself. Whatever consistently receives your attention gradually shapes your identity. If your attention constantly feeds outrage, fear, comparison, and distraction, your inner world becomes chaotic. If your attention feeds discipline, learning, meaningful relationships, gratitude, and purpose, your inner world strengthens. Attention compounds exactly like money. Small daily focus patterns become entire personalities over time. This is why protecting attention is one of the most important modern survival skills. Algorithms compete aggressively for human focus because attention generates profit. Outrage keeps people engaged. Comparison keeps people insecure. Insecurity fuels consumption, and many individuals spend years unknowingly surrendering psychological control to systems designed to monetize emotional instability. But emotionally intelligent people eventually reclaim authority over their attention intentionally. They become selective about what they consume, selective about who influences them, selective about where emotional energy goes, and that selectiveness creates peace. Not because life becomes easier, because mental noise decreases. There is enormous power in no longer reacting to everything. Not every opinion deserves your response. Not every conflict deserves your participation. Not every opportunity deserves pursuit. Not every criticism deserves emotional investment. Wisdom often looks like restraint. A calm person walking away from unnecessary chaos is not weak. They are disciplined. Discipline is misunderstood because people associate it only with productivity or work ethic, but emotional discipline may be even more important. The discipline to remain calm during uncertainty, the discipline to delay gratification, the discipline to say no, the discipline to leave unhealthy environments, the discipline to protect your peace, the discipline to tell yourself the truth even when the truth is uncomfortable. That kind of discipline changes lives quietly from the inside outward. One day a student asked a mentor, "What is the real secret to happiness?" The mentor smiled gently and replied, "Stop trying to make every moment feel good." At first the answer sounded strange, but the mentor continued, "Life contains boredom, frustration, uncertainty, loss, rejection, discomfort. Trying to eliminate these experiences only creates more suffering. Learn how to move through them without losing yourself. That is emotional maturity, not permanent positivity, not constant pleasure. Stability, the ability to experience difficult emotions without becoming controlled by them, and emotionally stable individuals become incredibly powerful because they are no longer constantly manipulated by impulses. They can think long-term. They can invest patiently. They can communicate honestly. They can maintain integrity under pressure. They can survive temporary discomfort for meaningful outcomes. That ability separates reactive lives from intentional lives. Intentional living requires awareness because unconscious habits quietly shape destiny. A person may unconsciously spend years prioritizing validation over peace, comfort over growth, distraction over purpose, and appearances over authenticity, without realizing the long-term emotional cost. But eventually, awareness interrupts the pattern. You begin asking different questions. What actually matters to me? What kind of life feels meaningful beyond social conditioning? What am I sacrificing for approval? What habits are delaying my freedom? What pain am I avoiding that I need to confront? Those questions are transformative because they shift life from autopilot into consciousness, and conscious living changes everything. You stop measuring success only financially. You begin measuring peace, alignment, freedom, integrity, depth of relationships, emotional resilience, presence, because eventually you realize a painful truth. A person can possess enormous external success while internally collapsing, and external collapse is easier to notice than internal collapse. Society sees bankruptcy. Society sees public failure. But invisible emotional emptiness often goes unnoticed for years. A person can smile publicly while privately feeling disconnected from life itself. That is why authenticity matters so deeply. Authenticity reconnects people to themselves. It removes performance, removes exhausting masks, removes the pressure of constantly pretending, and ironically, authentic individuals often become more successful because energy stops leaking into false identities. A person pretending constantly is psychologically exhausted. A person living honestly becomes psychologically lighter. There is freedom in no longer needing to impress everyone, freedom in saying, "This is who I am," freedom in accepting imperfection, freedom in admitting fear without surrendering to it, freedom in choosing peace over performance. At the end of life, people rarely regret not impressing more strangers. They rarely regret not buying more luxury items. They rarely regret not appearing more successful online. They regret abandoning themselves. They regret postponing joy. They regret tolerating meaningless lives because fear controlled them. They regret wasting years seeking approval instead of building authenticity. And perhaps the deepest wisdom of all is realizing that life was never supposed to become perfect before you finally allowed yourself to live it fully. Life is messy, uncertain, temporary, beautiful, painful, meaningful, and once you stop demanding perfection from existence, gratitude becomes possible again. You begin appreciating ordinary moments, morning, sunlight, honest conversations, financial stability, a peaceful mind, time with people you love, the ability to breathe without constant psychological pressure. And maybe that is the final realization most people spend their whole lives searching for. The goal was never to become fearless. The goal was never to become perfect. The goal was never to impress everyone. The goal was to build a life aligned deeply enough with your values that you no longer needed to escape from it. And once you achieve that, even imperfect days begin feeling meaningful.